Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the August 13th Tinderbox Meetup. I don't see Mr. Bernstein today, so we'll just jump right in ourselves. I think we can handle it on our own. Mark, this is one of those days I have to leave. Mark Anderson, I have to leave in an hour, so you've got the last 30 minutes, if you don't mind. And
Just to confirm, I don't need to do anything. The recording
we
keeps
won't
running.
have. I'm on my home Wi-Fi now, so we won't have the hotel mess up we had last time.
I'll get the big broom and just shoo everyone out at place.
Exactly. All good. So, yeah, and it looks like we haven't seen Andres for a while. Welcome. Nice to see you again. And Eric, we've seen you before, I think, but you're not a regular. So thanks for showing up. And so let's just jump in. What are people working on? We don't have an official agenda today. So let's just see if we can go around the room and grab some topics that are of interest to some people. And if not, I can always fill in the gaps with stuff I'm working on. But let's go around the room and see what people have to say. So Andres, what brings you to the group today?
Because I haven't been here for a long time, and I was excited. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I've had problems lately. I've been excited about 9.6. I haven't had the time to fiddle around with it, so perhaps we can. I'd be, for example, really excited if somebody could produce a poster online and just have me watch. Otherwise, I'm working on book proofs, which in the olden days used to be something that you would do with pen and paper. These days, you're logged into a editorial system, usually in India, and try to communicate with people and prevent worse things from happening. So that's it. Good to see you all.
Exciting times. Yeah, good. All right. And anybody else? Eric, what are you working on?
Hello everyone. Yeah, for me, I work on a lot of grants, and so I'm relatively new to Tinderbox, and so I'm still learning, and so I want to just nothing particular, just to hear what people are doing. But a lot of my work involves writing grants for like NIH type grants, and so I'm still learning how to leverage Tinderbox best with my working style, and like I have like the way I usually work on things is I take a lot of notes, and then right now Tinderbox becomes just kind of a place for me to put them all, and I'm trying to really get a system like using the attributes, because right now, like when I find something in an article or something that's helpful, I'm just kind of dumping it in Tinderbox, and I know I can use attributes to help me kind of organize that. I've seen a lot of the videos, so right now I'm just working on really getting used to and trying to develop those attributes to help organize my notes.
Perfect.
Right now.
And then just to stay on that point for a little bit more, do you see yourself at some point even wanting to write or draft the grants in Tinderbox, or write copy in Tinderbox and kind of help you collate those elements? And if you're grant writing, and I'd also imagine you could have a Tinderbox file where you have the similar templated copy that you would use from grant to grant to grant, and similar terminology and similar language that could be effective in helping you leverage and speed up the grant writing process.
Yeah, that's really what drew me to the Tinderbox, was learning that capability, because I think it can, because there's a lot of templated aspects to a grant proposal, and I wanted to place, like, so much of my writing I would end up losing because I didn't have a good place to store everything. So I'd like to have a place where I could, have the previous grants I've done, because they'll build on each other, and then to have those like templated, to be able to leverage, the attributes, templates, and just Tinderbox's ability to streamline that, where I could kind of plug in and have things formatted like a plug and go, like you said. You just said it a lot better than me, but that's the goal I would like to have.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think we can get there. And that could be, if we have time, that could be do you have maybe this be a tall order for today, but do you have a sample grant template, or one or two grants that are comparative we can put side by side?
I have the one I could show you the one I just recently did that I need to resubmit. So because it didn't make the cut this time. So I'm kind of working on revising. So it would be a good place to start to be able to use it. But I do have one that I could show. It's a PDF right now, or I could show the doc version, kind of the Word doc, but what that template.
I think that could be fun. And let's come back to that. See what else you have. The other thing I'd offer you when you're thinking about using Tinderbox for grant, there's grants and then or responses to an RFP. Very similar, request for proposal in my world. Very similar processes. And what I found too is pulling all of the questions that a grant or an RFP has into a Tinderbox file, and then curating your answers to those questions. And then you're able to then also be able to use the Tinderbox file as a proxy to make sure that you captured everything. Right? That you've asked every question that was asked. And so typically what I do when I first going through grants or an RFP, as I'm reading the RFP or as I'm reading the grant, I will copy and paste literally the question they're asking me with the associated number into a Tinderbox file. And then I'll also, while I'm going through that process, that will raise questions in my own mind that are related to or orthogonal to what's being discussed. And so then I'll add in my own questions too. And so as I'm doing that first pass reading, I'll have all of the questions that need to get answered as I go through that process. And I find that just immensely helpful.
Yes, that for sure. That sounds, would be very helpful because it's so easy to miss a detail. So
yeah. And then that way you don't miss any details. And at the end, you can just check, have I answered everything? Yes or no? Or the other nice thing about that too, as I think about it in this context as well, when you're going through that process and when you're doing it this is one of the great values of Tinderbox, when you're doing that in the moment and that inspiration pops up in your head. For me, Tinderbox is like the tool of capturing inspiration without getting in the way. So for instance, if you're trying to do what I was just suggesting, what you were saying in an Excel sheet, because you could easily use Microsoft Excel or numbers to add all those questions into rows. But the problem is Excel, because of its tabular format, doesn't lend itself to having information that doesn't fit well into a cell. Whereas Tinderbox does. And so you end up dropping inspiration and thinking, just lying to yourself, saying, "Oh, I'll remember that in the future," but you never do.
Right.
So you might as well capture the inspiration when you can at the moment. And so one example I'll have is I'll have in my files I have what's called a resources folder, and I'll have names of people on the project teams, and that would then roll up to an attribute called owner. So as I'm adding a question to the file, if I already know who the owner is going to be, or if I already think I know who's I'm going to need to help me answer that question, I'll stick their name in immediately. And then I'll move to the next question. And so then that allows you that incremental formalization, because then at the end of the process, when you pulled all of this out of your grant review or your process, you can just run an agent that says, go search on every question that Paul Christie needs to answer, and then you can give a quick email and say, "Hey, I'm working on this grant. It's due in 2 weeks. Here's the information I need from you," and you can get them started on that, and just a small piece of that without them having to read the entire thing.
Right. No, that would be immensely helpful.
Right. Yeah. And then that leads to the next thing is, how do you then export information out? Like, how do you get that to a Paul? And you either are copying and pasting that into an email, or you're getting more advanced by using the templating functions in Tinderbox. But that's the whole, we could do a whole project on that kind of grant deconstruction and response.
Yeah, that would be, yes. Okay. I think that would be wonderful.
All right. And then Paul, you've been talking about wanting to learn more about export. You want to talk a little bit about your interest there?
Yeah, actually, my use of Tinderbox has kind of morphed. I'm either a member or head of 4 nonprofit boards, which take up a lot of my time as a retired person, so to speak. I have recently moved to understand that combining everything into one Tinderbox document can mess everything up. And so I've divided everything into domains, one per board that I work on. And this week, I spent some time getting all the dates associated with each particular organization squared away. And then I discovered and started using effectively the timeline view to separate different categories of meetings or events into timeline bands, give them titles, shade them differently. And it just kind of blew my mind. I described it in the chat sidebar as a light bulb moment. Suddenly, everything that I was working on in that one domain was beautifully laid out in separate timeline bands with month bands across the columns. And it just suddenly became a useful tool to me in a way that had never been before. So that having solved that, I then started thinking, okay, now if I need to exchange this with, a Word document or Excel, or I need to send it out to a markdown thing, how do I export that? And I've been reading up on it, and I'm still not there. So I don't exactly understand exporting the way I need to. That's my next focus.
Okay, we can certainly do that. And again, the other thing I'd encourage you to do, and people that were listening may have misconstrued what you just said. And and you said combining everything into one Tinderbox file can mess everything up. And let's unpack that a little bit, because I don't want to freak people out about that.
Well, I didn't mean to be,
because, like, for me in my work, I've got 4 books, about 200 articles, and literally 2,000 or 3,000 terms and other things, all and people all combined in one Tinderbox file, and it's not messing things up for me. So I think you were referring to something slightly different. So can you unpack that?
Well, in this sense, so I originally started the idea, like my use, say, of Obsidian or the Brain or anything else, everything goes into one software program, and I use the interface to link everything up. And I realized that when I move that mode to Tinderbox and combine it with a lot of action code and agents and edicts, etc., I was tripping over all of them, spending a lot of time sorting out an edict that applied to one set of notes that was suddenly, because I'd imported other notes, suddenly spending a lot of time spinning wheels on those notes. And I realized, separating things into separate domains, for me, at least now, made Tinderbox easier to use. I think there's nothing wrong, obviously, with combining them into one big file, and that's my ultimate goal. I think that would be helpful, but I trip over myself when I throw things in that trigger agents or action code that they're not meant to be used for, if that makes sense. And suddenly I'm troubleshooting action code rather than actually looking up information.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I do think, but also that's not just about action code or edicts, but it's also about the way you structure your files too, and your use of containers, and then realizing that views can be constrained to a particular container, or like a hyperbolic view or a timeline view. And those are just use strategies. The other thing that I might point out there too is, I too was in that process a while back, and last 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think we had a whole discussion, or I put out a whole discussion about optimization strategies for a larger file, right? And when you start combining multiple projects into one file, there are absolutely some optimization strategies that you want to take a place that suppresses action code in one place and allows it to run in others, stops it everywhere when need be. So you're not running 60 different agents that are unnecessarily slowing things down, or what I was finding was I was asking Tinderbox to run the same process over and over and over again with absolutely no computational value. It was just running the same math problem, 2 + 2, every 3 seconds, and it was always coming up with the answer 4, and I only needed to have it run once. And so I was finding, and again, that's an example, but the idea was I was having it try to do the same thing over and over again. That was unnecessary because nothing changed. And those are some of the optimizational issues that you can start needing to think through as you're writing your code when you get into that process. All right, that's interesting, and I think that we could probably address many of your questions or about export in going through the grant discussion for Eric. So before we jump into Eric's topic, though, anybody else have any comments, questions, ideas, or do we want to all gravitate to Eric's grant writing project? Because I think we can, that'll be an interesting one to start digging into. All right, Eric, if you don't mind us putting you on the spot, you've got the stage. So do you have a grant you can share with us and we can start deconstructing it?
Yeah, so sure. I was just gonna pull it up. So this is the one so this is actually this is the first one that I've submitted for because I'm transitioning from like postdoc fellowship into assistant, into like an investigator with, an assistant professor. So this is the first one I'd submitted. And I can just show.
Okay, you're gonna share. We're not seeing anything if you're sharing your screen.
So, yeah, well, sorry, I was gonna open it, but I'm having a couple of. Okay, so I'm gonna try to share screen. So I have it. Can y'all see the?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the PDF version for this mechanism. It has this format of where we have our specific aims, we'll call it, where you have, and then for me, since it's called the Career Development Award, I have to have my background, why I can do the work that I'm proposing, and what training I'll need for this grant, what procedures I'm going to do, and then what's going to happen, like what my goals are. So, you have this first page after the goals, what the relevance is, because this is for the VA. So it's, it's centered for veterans health here in the United States, for, that we have the healthcare for veterans. And so this is what this mechanism is for. And the significance. And then we have this table of contents. And I have mentors on this grant. So I have to have letters from each of those, their biographical sketches, my career plan, research plan, and then how I'm going to protect human studies and the ethical steps I'm going to take to make sure that, the participants are protected, the resources of my center, the literature cited, and then the rest of these letters of commitment and endorsements from people. So all of this has to go in. And then for this, it was an easy budget page. So these are all of these are the formats for like our bio sketches. And they go for each of the mentors I have on the grant or team members, like we each have one. So I have to make sure that they send me their information on time. I have to make sure that they send
Yeah, so it's a pretty big, hairy thing.
Right. And so then yeah, it is. So I have to have all that, and then their letters, and then their mentorship, and then this is where I start on mine. So this is where like my career plan comes in. I have to have certain sections for it, and then I have to have certain sections for the research plan.
Okay. So if I were to, does anybody have any comments before we just jump in, or should I just, riff a little bit on this?
Explode.
Okay. So, a few things for me. We are recording. Good. So a few things for me that come up when I see this. The immediate thing that came off the top of my head was DevonThink. Do you have DevonThink?
I do have DevonThink. I kind of went all in, and I bought Tinderbox and DevonThink at the same time because I was struggling to keep all of my stuff together, and so I just
no, wickedly good. And how about so let's start with a list of tools. So Tinderbox is obviously a core one. DevonThink is another. Are you a bookends guy, a Zotero guy, MelL? What's your citation tool?
So the citation tool, I'd used bookends previously, and I really liked it, and I seemed like the Tinderbox and DevonThink integrated well with it, so I just kept bookends.
Okay. Yeah, and we just did a couple weeks ago with a really good session with Jonathan from Bookends. And so that will help you automate. So the other thing we can show you too, and we won't dig into this today, but just be aware of it. You're going to want your bookends. You're also going to want to get Pandoc, and we can have a. You can. I'll drop my email for you later, and we can have a side conversation on this to help you set this stuff up. But when you integrate Pandoc with Tinderbox, with bookends, with export, you can have all of your citations on citation references all automatically get pulled together into your output. And then you can dynamically switch it too. So if somebody's asking for Chicago style versus APA style formatting, all of that gets automated.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's mind-blowingly time saving. Yeah. Yeah. So so those are some of the tools. Now, what was immediately coming up for me is if I were doing this without thinking about it, I would immediately pull that PDF into DevonThink and start and I would do one of two things. I'd either use DevonThink's highlighting functionality as I'm reading through the document, just to highlight the things that were important to me at first pass. Because keep in mind, you can export all your highlights in DevonThink into Markdown and pull those into Tinderbox. So all of the highlights you make in a PDF file in DevonThink can come right into Tinderbox. And the other thing to keep in mind is I actually prefer my preferred, and again, it's like one of those, latest shiny objects, is the highlighting, the PDF reader highlights. And there's also another PDF reader called Skim. Skim's really good because it's open source and all that. The highlights PDF reader, I don't know, for some reason, I just like its UI better. But the great thing is any highlights you do in highlights, you store the file in DevonThink, you open up the file via DevonThink into highlights, do your annotations, hit save, and they all get saved and they're all stored. So you're actually not lost. The apps all communicate with each other really nicely. But the key point is whatever, find your PDF highlighting app of de jour that works for you, Skim, highlights, DevonThink itself. And just remember all of those annotations can be independently pulled into Tinderbox. Moreover, as you're going through that, you can use the DevonThink or highlights note capability. So you're not just highlighting, you could be adding a note in the PDF saying, oh, I got to go talk to John about this. And those annotations can get pulled into Tinderbox too. And then what ends up happening with that is you then can run a script in Tinderbox, which we can show you how to do, which then takes your notes and turns them into tasks and takes your highlights and turns them into something else. And if you have a color coding strategy, you can actually have Tinderbox that says, if it's highlighted blue, do this. If it's highlighted red, do this. So for instance, as you're going through it, you can say anything in red is a task, anything in blue is a quote, anything in X is a question. And then all of that could be automatically parsed out by Tinderbox for you when you start getting to your back into your assembly process. So that would be my first triage approach that I would take. I'll let you have a breath there because you seem to be responding to that.
Yeah, that's going to be perfect because this week I'm supposed to receive all the reviewer comments on what they want. So we send it, they're going to send the reviewer comments. And that whole system would just, because it's such a tedious process, to be able to streamline, like how you describe that, to be able to take the notes, take the comments, have the highlights, put them into Tinderbox, and then I could task that out. Like I need to address this in the methods. I need to address this for John. I need to make sure I call, Tim for this, or I need to call, and I can set my tasks to do, because that's my struggle of keeping all of it organized. I'm not naturally an organized person, and so to have it help me see quickly what I need to do would be amazing for the grant process.
And then also too, remember, take a note on this as well. And again, we'll help you figure all this out later. But Paul Christie brought up this idea of timeline. So Tinderbox has this attribute concept called date. Right. And its system attributes are start date, end date. But remember, you can create any date you want for yourself for whatever reason. I've probably got 30 different types of dates in my Tinderbox files. you can then turn around and use those dates in the timelines. So like this, and so you can actually see the due dates by timeline and break them out by bands. And there's some really other interesting visuals you can do along in that process as well. Mr. Eddie's got his hand up for a while. Let's ask him real quick, and then we'll keep going.
A comment, a quibble, a semantic quibble over the normal use of the word integration, as you were describing the appropriate. Mark Anderson, no laughing, and Bruce, you keep your mouth shut. The proper word is interoperable. These tools are organized appropriately for their tasks, and then I think it's through Pandoc, which I haven't seen yet. Is then you give the appearance of integration, but the stuff that you have, these various different collections, stay in their appropriate different places. As the conversations was entered, you need Tinderbox, you need DevonThink, you need blah, 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 blah. And it's just like when you look at your toolbox, you got a hammer, you got wrenches, you got sockets. These are different tools for different things. Okay,
that's an important point. And so the idea, the distinction you're making is interoperability versus integration. Yeah, and that's a really important
integration is when a Marine Corps friend who ran a data modeler, who ran a nuke, I think it was a power plant, I didn't ask, makes the distinction between interoperable versus integration. Integration is not possible. The only way it's possible is if you have a blank sheet of paper. And Eric is absolutely not playing from a blank sheet of paper, because you have all these competing people that want to do it. I don't like your format.
Right.
Yeah. And Corey Doctorow's got we've talked about this before, but he's got great views. Like you have standards, then you have like commercial interoperability, and then you have adversarial interoperability. And standards is like how we all agree that we're going to follow these steps to make our stuff work together nicely. Kind of commercial interoperability that agrees that we formally agree that we're going to have our stuff work together. And adversarial interoperability is, I'm not asking you, I'm just going to start working with your stuff, whether or not you like it or not. And Corey believes that innovation and society really moves ahead on the adversarial side as we play that game of whack-a-mole, where I'm forcing my integration with you. You don't like it, so you do stuff to make me not do it, which makes me react. And that interaction back and forth is really what drives innovation. Really interesting work. So I highly recommend reading his articles on that. Mr. Bernstein, your hand's up.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the background of integration. If I can. It happens I'm writing something, though it's still in the early stages, on where this comes from. And correct me if I'm wrong, David Eddy, but I think the place to look for origins is Kernighan and Plauger software tools. A very interesting and terribly influential book about a particular style of programming developed for Unix, in which in Unix, you had a notion that a program reads some stuff from an input, which we called the standard input. It might be assigned to a file, or it might be the keyboard, or it might be another program, and then writes a stream to what it calls the standard output, which again might be some file or a different file, or a printer or something. So you have this notion of an input stream and an output stream, and the program does stuff to what comes in on the input stream and writes it to the output stream. This is a very old abstract notion of computing, what computers do. But what they put together was a bunch of software widgets, tools, which did useful, small, predictable things by reading from one stream and then writing the output to another stream. For example, there was WC, which is a program that counts words and writes the number of words the output. And you can say, as an option, don't count words, count lines. And there's ls, which lists all the things in a directory and writes it to the output. There's echo, which just copies the input to the output. There are lots of these, and they showed how by combining 6 or 7 of these in a row, you could do quite interesting things, transforming formats and then extracting the data that you really want and then writing it and then reformatting it for some other program and then sending it to the printer. So the idea of all of these tools is powered by the notion that we have a bunch of things that write from one stream, read from one stream and write to another stream. And streams in this sense are simple mechanisms that are well defined. And everything that reads to or writes from a stream, so defined, can be integrated into chains of these software tools. This is not really the integration that people talk about in other fields. And it's not precisely the integration people currently talk about in web APIs either. But when web tools like Obsidian, say, talk about integrations, they are aspiring to the clarity and the interchangeability of Unix software tools. And it's a weak sort of integration, but it actually is a useful, well-defined metaphor.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thoughts, comments, reactions to that?
I agree with, I mean, you referred to, was this K&R?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's K&P. K&R was the C book. Hello World.
But same Kernigan.
Same Kernigan.
Okay.
Different co-author.
Yeah, I'm really, well, I am speaking at a higher level in the, well, I think of the, because I live in the world of the IBM mainframe. And so the creation of that, they weren't exactly working from a blank sheet of paper. They already had punch card machines and they knew how to handle those streams. But I hope everybody here who, probably there are very few programmers, but do read this Mythical Man Month, very short. And the effort going into this was 33% planning, 17% coding, 25% unit tests, 25% system tests. The life that Mark, it'd be fascinating, you know, Mark and your team of the architecture that goes in, the architectural planning that goes into before you go to the keyboard, before you go to the code. And particularly now that you have, I mean, how old is Tinderbox? When did you put a first working version of Tinderbox out?
2001.
2000, so it's 20 you're pushing. And the fact that you can still extend it, modify it, is absolutely astonishing. But it is this difference between these tiny little input, process, output. I mean, that was my first exposure in 1964 to some guy from the Pentagon. You know, a line is input, a box is process, a line is output. And then Ken Orr came along and said, "No, you got to have a feedback loop. You know, you got to trap those errors." But it's a lot of philosophy. But you reach to the tool. I mean, in that level that you're describing, Mark, which I totally agree, is you have to know which one of those little two-word commands, two-letter commands, and the amount of hammer and sledgehammer you have applied to that input stream. You know, you're not going to feed it. If you feed it garbage, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
So there's an enormous amount of pre-processing. End of sermon. But anyway,
yeah,
got it. So let's go back. Let's go back to Eric's and Mr. Anderson.
I just a quick thing, and just a thought listening to that is it's very interesting. I think one of a big disconnect for someone listening to this now in the 2020s is that what we forget is so that all these Unix tools seem rather gnomic and difficult to understand, but it was a different time. Computers were less powerful. Typing fewer things was just one of the few problems you had about not overloading the system. But it does make it quite difficult for the wider audience to approach. So the abstraction involved, I don't think, will be sort of odd to anyone. Certainly, most academics and things who are used for abstracting from one thing to another. The bit that probably is hardest to sort of comprehend is the fact that there's no interface to look at. It's not that there has to be, it's just the whole problem of your starting perspective. If that's sort of what you expect to see, where's the box I type in? What if the box I type in is just a sort of black screen with a little winking cursor? There's a really interesting something lurking in there, that disconnect that occurs, because the ideas are really powerful, but they're almost shut away from many people now behind the sort of the limitations of the time that just aren't obvious. Anyway.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so I was thinking now that I've only got about 21 minutes left, and then we'll let Mr. Anderson pick up once I'm done. But I'm thinking maybe we can start with starting out with a blank Tinderbox file and constructing one up as we start thinking through the things what we would need to do for working on Eric's grant efforts. So let's go ahead and I'll share my screen if that's all right for everybody, and we'll start that process. Okay, so we've got an open blank Tinderbox file, and we've got this concept of this mythical grant that we're wanting to work with. And Eric, is there is that grant something public that you can email to me, or is that private? Because it'd just be easier for me to copy and paste. You're on mute.
Yes, I can send the directions instead of like my write-up of it. I was going to send the
yeah,
RF.
just the directions are good.
Yep, I'm doing that now.
All right, we'll put that up side by side. Okay, but having said that, so we've got a blank Tinderbox file, and we've already talked about a few things that we know we're going to need. So we're going to need things like tasks. And when I do this, sometimes it just because I like that kind of containerization efforts, I might move things around a little bit as I get more refined. But I know I'm going to need some kind of task folder. I know I'm going to need questions folder, right? So we'll have a whole bunch of questions that we're going to do. I know there's going to be a people folder because there's going to be people that'll be working on this project. Because we've got another, and we're just brainstorming here a little bit, but I know I'm also going to have a deadlines folder, right? So, and that's going to be like, one, you could also call it milestones, but these are like basically project dates that we're going to need to hit. And if we just start with that, I'll then there's a lot of people that love doing this kind of work in map view. But for more of and you certainly can, but I find popping over to outline view to be very quick for doing this step. And then as I'm thinking this through too, I'm going to say, okay, well, wait a minute. Right out of the gate, I'm looking at these 3 or 4 elements, and I'm seeing 4 different prototypes. So let's go ahead and create those now. So if I go up to the file menu and I hit the built-in prototypes feature, you go file, built-in prototypes, and you just select one. My default muscle memory is just to select the person one at first. And so you'll see here, up here, I've got a person attribute, and you can go ahead and create your own attributes, if you will. So often I'll type like URL LinkedIn, right? Because I know, especially in my day and age of my work, I know I'm going to want the LinkedIn URL for somebody, because if you don't have a curated LinkedIn profile, you might as well not exist in business today. So I go ahead and grab that, and we'll stick that in there. And I just did that now just to demonstrate our ability to create our own unique ones. And so then I now know that, and then I'll think, okay, well, I know what, I'm going to also want another a prototype, and this one I'm going to call it folder. And folder will just kind of act as my containers for projects. And so then I'm going to quickly say, well, you know, when I'm doing an on add function with folders, what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that I'm on adding prototypes. And so the on add is accessible in two ways. You can either be viewing it through the displayed attributes, or you can go to a note. Where I'll go to the menu, and you'll see if I click on the action element in the inspector is essentially equivalent to on add. Rules are action code that runs all the time. Edicts are action code that runs about once an hour. On remove is when you're removing something from a notes container. We can go into those details a little bit later. But the reason why I do that is essentially what I'm going to say here is I'm going to then hold the shift key down, select all of these notes, right mouse click, and add the folder to that. So now I'm basically automatically creating my folder containers very quickly, which then, because I've done the prototype functionality, make sure that on add displayed attribute gets showed to every one of those. And we could talk about prototypes and inheritance later, but I just kind of want to hammer through this really quickly so Mark Anderson has something to work with once I leave in 16 minutes. And what I'm going to do really quick right now is I'm going to say on add, and I'm going to say make the prototype equal to person. Okay, so what this is saying, did I spell it right? Proto TYP, I just spelled it wrong. Type. There we go. So what this action code is saying is I'm saying when I add a note to this container, this note people folder, I want you to take the action of applying the prototype person to any of the notes that I add to this folder. So now if I hit the option shift key when I'm selecting the people folder, I'm going to automatically add a child to that note, and I can say Eric Richardson. Right now, if I had done that without doing this prototyping functionality, and I just said people folder like this, and I go ahead and add, I can have another note, and you're seeing they're all generic stem cell like notes that haven't adopted any inheritance or any prototypes or of that nature. So this kind of, right out of the gate, you can start developing some automation into your effort that is going to be templatizing the process for you, helping you get a bit more expert in doing that. So similarly, then what we're going to want to have here is we're going to want to have a task folder. And I always, for the non-system generated prototypes, I always put a P in front of them, so then that way I have the ability to distinguish the prototype task from another note that might be named task. We're also going to have another prototype we're going to want as P question. And we're going to want to have another prototype called P, I don't know, we'll call it milestone. Or yeah, milestone's fine. All right. And what I might want to do is, as I'm thinking this through, I'm like, you know what? A milestone is really like an event. So I'm just going to go up and add the events prototype, because you'll see that start date, end date, due date, time band. So that's kind of already there. I don't need participants in that one. And let's say I actually want this to be more like a calendar date than the time. So I'm going to change the badge there. And so then I'm going to copy this code like this. Go over here, paste that in here, and then go P event. I'll just call it event. Okay, so that way when I'm adding a new event, and so this one, and I use the idea of prefixes that helps me distinguish between notes, and we'll call this one the kickoff. And then, and this is where you can start brainstorming too, as you're going through this process and you're thinking about your events. You could say, whoops. Event, due date or final submission date. You may have event, first round of input. So, and I'll let you kind of go through and fill that out as you will, but you can then start thinking about, oh, wow, I can now have all of these different ways of putting up dates. And just to show you how this works, let me go ahead here and let's just say the start of the kickoff date is today. And you can mess with these things later. Let's say this due date, this start date is somewhere down here. And for lack of a better method, we're going like that. So now if I were to actually right mouse click on this note deadline folder, open up this into a new tab, and then say, not tree map, timeline view, I can actually start seeing the timelines of when my things are due now and building up bands. So you can actually start using this as a project management tool in that regard as well. So that kind of helps you just start building that out. If we start looking at tasks, we'll think about, well, a task is going to be, I don't know, give it a check mark because it's something that's due. And what are the things that we'll need to have on tasks? Well, obviously, much like an event, we'll have a start date, we'll have an end date, we'll have a due date, we'll have an owner. You may want to add, terms that are related to that. And let's go ahead, and it's asking me to create these notes. So we'll go ahead and hit set, and we'll set terms. So terms are, I use the term term. Some people use the term tags. Other people use the term keywords. I'm defaulting to the use of term now, simply because all my action code is related to that. So that will help you later. And then what we're going to do here, go like this, and we're going to go up here and we'll say, this is going to be P task. And while we're at it, we might as well just do that real quick and say P question, even though we've not created it yet. Oh yeah, we have. And then we're good. And then on this one, we'll go here. Say this one also has an owner. And milestones, we don't need anymore because we called them events. And we're going to call this one P milestone. And you can see how I'm kind of incrementally fixing things as I've changed my mind on when I want to call stuff. Okay, so now, okay, and then we can move stuff around if you want. Now, the other thing that's important here is, watch this. Let's say I've got this element called event kickoff, and I move event kickoff over accidentally for whatever reason to the task, and it automatically changed that to task because that's what we asked Tinderbox to do. When you add something to this note, make it a task. But really, I didn't want that kickoff to be a task. I just accidentally moved it over into another folder and it changed the prototype on me. So the way to fix that, and I'll let Mark Anderson, this is one for you to explain the logic to for people later. But if you put the pipe sign in front of the equal sign and then go back and update all of your on ads, and this has become like a muscle memory default that I do for containers. What this is saying is, so basically what this is saying now is make the prototype of the note being added to this folder the person prototype, unless or only if the note you're adding doesn't already have its own prototype. So now if you watch this, if I move the events over here, it doesn't change because the events prototype already has a value. And so we're not changing it. So that's kind of a way of being able to, but if you have a note that doesn't have a value, then it will get the task. And so that's just a little thing that's super helpful, that you won't have to waste months trying to figure out, as I had to, as I was going through that process. So then, one of the key tasks you're going to have right out of the gate is, ask Bruce to get us his feedback. Right. So that, and this is the example I was telling you earlier about, quickly adding, adding in tasks and doing things like that, that you can have, so as you're reading as you're going through the grant and tasks are coming up, you can be automatically just sticking them into your Tinderbox file and you've got your task folder. And also too, you'll see here, we forgot our checkbox. So you'll have, checkbox there. And so, you know, what we can do, and I'll give you an example of adding some. Oh, because I did it to the wrong one. Oh, I put it on milestone. You can have checked on milestone 2. Okay, and while we're at it, I'll go ahead and maybe Mark can play with this a little bit, but I'm going to go up to the hints folder now, and I'm going to add functions in really quick. And I'm going to add a function that says f status, and we'll say function f status. And Mark can explain some of this in just a second, but we'll say if checked equals true, then name strike equals true, and color equals green. All right, else. And then let's revert back to the defaults. So one thing I have found is it might feel like unnecessary, but actually getting the simple things like changing states and stuff like that is so visually appealing when you're working. So I can have another one is like another task would be, submit final draft. Right. So now if I go up here and I check this, and now what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to go to the task folder, and I'm now going to add to the task folder this rule. So basically what I'm now saying is, hey, Tinderbox, every few seconds, check any note that has the task function, or that has the f status function on it for that function. And while we're at it, we might as well also apply the same thing to milestones. Okay. And so now that we've done that, if I come up here and check this, you'll all of a sudden see this task has been strike through and it's green. Right. So now you can visually see that it's been done. And then when you're running your agents, you can say only get me the notes that the tasks that are checked equals false. And so it's those kinds of things that are just going to help you with this project immensely when you go through that. Now we're getting the file starting to get a little bit more complicated. So what I would tend to do is I would use go up to the note, add the separator. So I can just separate backstage from the different elements. And then I might go ahead and add another separator up here just to have visuals, and maybe that's that. And then I can have maybe go like this. Right. So those elements that are consistent, and I know I'm going to want to work across different projects, like people are going to be related to that project. And if I'm doing multiple grants at once, so I've got a project team, I might come up here and I'll say projects, grant filings. And then I'll go grant 1. Grant 2. So for these, whoops, we'll move those in there. And what did I do with my task folder? Here we go. Okay. We'll go kind of new to my task folder. Here it is. I've got a magic mouse and it just does that. So now what you can actually see here is I've now quickly made it possible for me to be working on multiple grants at once. Right? Because invariably you're never working on just one grant at one time. You've got multiple grants in different flights, and you've got people working on. So if I do this, now let me show you something else that was kind of fun in the last couple minutes I've got with you. If I go down to my prototypes, I can create a prototype called grant. And in the grant folder, I've got a task folder. And I can do this because I've already got the action code associated with it. Oops. So I know every grant's going to have tasks, deadlines, and I'll just show you one other piece of action code, which is kind of fun. So, and then I'll be done in just so by doing this, we'll call this one P grant, and I don't want this one to be a. Did I just lose you guys? No, there you are. Okay. All right. So by doing this, what I've done now, and this is a little trick for people. So when you know you've got, so we're going to do P grant here, right? So now when I want to do my next grant, I can just automatically, if I do it, spelled it right, P grant. Should have added. Okay. Oh yeah, that it didn't. Yeah, because P grant doesn't have a folder here. There you go. All right. So if you notice, when I added that new grant here, we'll call it grant 3. Grant 3. It automatically got all of the folders that I already want. So now I'm kind of templating. So now I can start working, quickly working on multiple grants simultaneously, and the structure of what I want in grants are always going to be there. And then as I'm refining my process, and there's another thing I can say like raw notes. So in the future, I want, in the future, I want all of my grant projects to have a raw notes folder. So now when I go create grant 4, you'll see that grant 4 is now got the raw notes folder too. So that allows you to kind of incrementally develop your project over time, and as you're working on it. So what I'd encourage you, so that's how I would go about starting to set this up. And then maybe Mark, what you can talk about, and then, or maybe for next week, or when you and I, if you want to have a call next week, I can show you. Let me just drop in this one bit of action code from my other file, and just to give you a couple more tips. Extract. Let me find one more. Where is it? So while does that make got to be able to find this. Where is it? Where'd it go? Oh, wrong file. That's why. The other thing I want to add in here real quick is this, and then that should give you guys all ample amounts of stuff to talk about once I leave. Is stamps here. There we go. This one. So if I go back into my hints folder and I copy in the stamps file from my other file, looks like all the attributes are there. Okay. So the reason why I do that is, as you said too, when you're in meetings, your meetings aren't necessarily going to be that clean. And so let's go, and then you might actually want to have, since we're working on grant 1, you might want to have another file called meetings file. Meeting notes. And we'll call this one meeting TBD. Now meeting on 13 Aug 23. And this is why I like to have, what we might want to do is actually keep that one as milestones. We'll call this one P meeting. And then I'm going to change its badge to, where'd the little clock go? The little clock. So that's a meeting. You can tweak these later. Call P meeting. And the reason why I do P meeting is in meetings, I have the idea of participants. And I think, and now, by the way, here's an interesting thing to check out too. If I go to participants, I just want to make sure that participants is a set. So that way I can move multiple people in here. So let's say when you're recording the notes from a meeting, you're saying like, Kim Peterson, Michael Becker, and so were in this meeting. So now I know who was in this meeting, and it was on today at 9 o'clock. And it went from today to 10 o'clock. Right now, you could say, here's our agenda. And here's the topic 1. And you could be talking about the notes that you're going to do here. Here was topic 2. And this would probably be more like the way you would write your notes during your meeting, because you're not really organizing them or parsing them yet. And then you'll have another section down here, maybe called tasks. And you'll say like task at Becker. Respond to questions. Tasks, at Anderson help. Okay, so that might be the way you typically go about taking your meeting notes. You could be doing that in anything, like Art has taught me how to use drafts. So that way, when I'm taking these kind of meetings, I'm doing it on my phone or in any other application. Copy and paste that. I could just sit there, copy and paste that from another application like Drafts, paste it into Tinderbox. And then the action code that I've copied in here, extract tasks. What that does is, if I now apply that stamp to this note, what it does is it goes through and pulls out the tasks. Now it broke because I've got @ signs in the meetings, so I don't want places converting there. So now if I reapply it, you'll see it's pulled out the tasks at Becker from those meeting notes. And so this is a way of getting Tinderbox to be automating the process. And you notice this one, I thought I wrote tasks, but I didn't. So now if I rewrite my, correct the spelling error of my prefix that I made, and then I apply that again, I now get both tasks. And so this is the whole process that I would go through to automate the hell out of this. And now, and I do have to leave him about 5 minutes late for my other meeting. Maybe Mark, you can go through and talk about how we can parse questions out and create a questions prototype and that kind of stuff. All right, guys, I got to run. See ya. I'll give you this file in the chat.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, start again. Now unmuted. I see a couple of hands up. So while Michael's sending me that file, Art, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, okay. So I'm putting you in the position of answering something incomplete by Michael. So enjoy. So it's a 2-part question. The first is, so when he did this trick of assigning a prototype and then putting, excuse me, subfolders into that prototype, isn't there I could check this, but isn't there an inherent risk that you can mess up your data? Because say I have a prototype assigned to that particular folder, saying grant 1, and then I remove the prototype, and then I reapply a modified or updated version of the prototype. Is it not going to mess up all the contents of the folders inside, or delete them and then recreate them?
Do you know, off the top of my head, so what you're referring to is there is there is a sort of notion of a prototype being able to bequeath, so-called bequeath its children. It's a Boolean. So you can, for any prototype, you can say, I do or don't want this prototype to bequeath its children. What that means is, if it's on, when you assign a prototype to a note, it will also add any of the child elements of that note, of that prototype rather, to the note to which the prototype is applied. The trick, and it's described in ATBRF, the thing not to do is to nest prototypes. So what you need to do is, if you want to have, for instance, you want to have a prototype that creates 3 subfolders, each of which use a prototype, then what you want to do is to create the prototypes for those subfolders separately, apply the prototype to each of the folders that are the children of the prototype. And then when you apply that, the 3 folders that it applies to any new note will have the correct prototype. It's much simpler than that description makes it sound. You can go read up. When I get a second, I'll put a note in the thing. But it's basic. If you look for bequeathing children, it's quite a powerful process. It helps once you get to the point where you really know what you want in structural terms. I'm going to loop back. You asked another question, which is, well, what happens if I assign a prototype and then I change it and I assign it, or I reassign the prototype differently? What I don't know is if a prototype will assign something that wasn't there before. So for instance, one of the simplest things that you can do with a prototype is if there is text in the prototype, when you apply it to a new note the first time, i.e. the note you're applying it to has no text, has never had any text, then the prototype's text is put in there. It might say, write something here, answer this question, whatever. If you then change the prototype and apply it again, it won't, that text won't come through, because by this stage, the text basically has a local value, and that breaks inheritance, and that's sort of standard to the way inheritance works across Tinderbox. So I'd have to check on that. So in other words, if you're saying I set up my my prototype that bequeath 3 folders, and then I thought it'd be a really cool idea if there was a 4th one. If I go and reapply the prototype, will all the other ones change? Will they be removed? My gut instinct without testing is no, they won't, and probably the 4th one will turn up, but I can't be certain without testing. So I'm partial answer there.
No, I was watching Michael update the prototype, and it didn't modify the existing master grant folders that already had the previous iteration of the prototype applied to them. So I mean, I just wonder whether it opens up this lacuna where it's possible that even you might run action code that goes, hey, update. Every time I modify my grant prototype and I add folders, I remove folders. And then I apply some action code to, as soon as I launch my project, to go in there and grant each grant folder the latest version of such prototype. Am I potentially opening up my data to subfolders being removed or renamed or data being deleted as part of that action? I could test it, I guess, and then just come up with something and throw it in the forum.
Yeah.
Michael's just question.
Yeah, no, he's just sent me that.
Hey guys, sorry, I just put the Tinderbox file up in there. I thought
it's just downloading. And I'll just pop it up in a second. Paul, you have a question? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Did I close that out or?
Yeah, I'm going to test it with this anyways. But the second question I also had was, recently, I think it was in 9.5, Eastgate came up with this feature where if you have an @ sign, it automatically recognizes it as a location and the pound sign as a person. Can you override that in any way? Because
yes, it's actually if you go to the future and scroll back in the recording, you'll actually see it's in the document settings.
Okay.
It's one of those things where it's impossible to get a default that suits everybody.
Yeah.
And for some people in the same document, it's never going to be right. But there is basically a global switch for the document so when it's enabled, that feature will run, and when it's disabled, it won't. And it won't affect anything that's already happened, because what that switch is doing is saying, well, when you see a new note with the following, one of these special characters in the note, I want you to do a special thing.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Paul.
Yeah, I hope this is a quick question, and maybe it can point me to the right place in the documentation. But I posted it in the chat. When I'm entering attributes for a note, and I don't want to take my hands off the keyboard, I'm that lazy. Is there a path for attributes by default where it cycles through the attributes? Sometimes I'll find myself entering an attribute, hitting enter, jumps down to the next attribute, hit enter, and then it goes back to a completely random place in the list of attributes.
Right. I think that has now been fixed, and I think it occurred with only certain data types of attributes. you know, I feel for our developer here because there are two very distinct, well, there are two, if not three distinct sorts of people. There are people who never touch anything except the keyboard. There are people who never touch the keyboard except under duress, and those who are a mixed mode. And it's not deliberate, but what works for one doesn't work for another. So you know, many things will have keyboard shortcuts and things. I do know that essentially the data the displayed attributes table is designed so you can, using the right sort of combination of keystrokes, you can effectively sit, work, and doing a key only entry. And I have a vague memory that issue was definitely raised, and I believe it was fixed in 9.6. So if you go to the changelog for 9.6 in ATB ref and look in the list of bullet points at the top, probably in the miscellaneous section, if it got fixed, that sort of thing will probably be recorded there. Well, actually, this is a good meta point here. So when I write up the changelog for ATB ref, certainly, which is based effectively on the release notes that are also in the help, if it relates to a particular feature and it's significant enough to sort of warrant mention in the note, I put in the note. Otherwise, I put in the general fixes. And the sort of bulleted list is more about stuff that, if you're a long time player, it's probably something that's been bugging you for ages, and you'll see that it's fixed. It's not worth mentioning it in the actual note because that just confuses all the new users who now wonder what it was that was fixed that they don't have a problem with. So that's how I try and de-interleave the two. Okay, and that's I see, just reading Art's note. Okay, so it looks as though from Art's note that if you reapply the bequeathal process, which I'll quickly try and stick in a link to that because that's probably useful for people. Second, put that in. So I've just put a note about this concept of bequeathing notes. And maybe I'll get around. I think I've got some old demo that shows it. It's a really nice feature. It came out, there was a, you know, as ever, something that was lighting up the forum way back when this was added, was somebody wanted to basically create when they create a new note, what they actually wanted to create was a complete folder set. And in fact, if I recall, I think it was a psychologist who wanted, basically, when he had a new client or a new case, he wanted a quite structured set of notes and containers to be added for each new, effectively each new patient, and for some of those new notes to actually have prototypes on them. So it's quite elegant. Circling back to Art's point, I wouldn't worry too much if it goes wrong. It's all fixable. The sort of the learning point here is just remember the computer is not omniscient. So the double-edged sword here is Tinderbox is remarkably flexible. It will allow you to go back and do things. It will actually allow you to do things that in many other applications would almost be a complete do-over. But it does mean that if you suddenly have a bright idea and you tweak something, you just want to be alive to the things that do and don't inherit. So the question was really good, and that's something I probably need to go back and annotate because, well, it's the first time anyone's ever raised this. But obviously, you know, like all these things, that once you know, then it's something can be recorded, and it's not a surprise. And one might immediately think, well, why doesn't it update? But almost invariably in these cases, there is a good reason for and against. There are normally two different use cases, both of which are entirely logical, and one of them has to win out because it's unfair to make the application guess which of those it should be.
Yeah, no, good point. And also, I think, I mean, to the point that if you are in that position that you've modified your template for your new grants, then you owe it to yourself to go back over your old grants and see that you're not going to break anything in the process. Or recreate that grant folder saying, okay, you know, now I've updated my grants, so now I have a whole new structure, but you manually then must move your subfolders and the individual notes within those subfolders to the new. And sort of like a vaguely related point, like I noticed a while back when I had change the name of my prototypes, you know, it breaks all your action code, because your action code is going to look for a prototype with that exact same name as you used to have in the past.
Yeah.
So every time you change your prototype name, you have to go in and check all your action code. Otherwise, you're going to mess something up. Seriously.
Yes, not necessary. The thing, so some things Tinderbox will do for you. So for instance, if I think that, for instance, there's a nice Freudian slip here. So we actually wanted milestone. And I think now that if I go to the milestone folder, I don't know which one was milestones.
I think it's a subfolder in one of the.
Anyway,
No,
it matters not at this
folder.
point.
It's a
Sorry?
deadline folder because it has.
Oh, deadline folder, right. So if I go to here, and I'll take the opportunity to open up, because and this is not a reflection at all on the way things are added earlier. This is just to show people watching that there's more than one way to set these, because one of the things that we can do, so I've changed the name because there's an unintentional typo there. What I actually want to do is, you'll notice that this has an auto change for me. Now you might assume it would, and this is the point to take away, is it won't. So it's just the same that I can go into Tinderbox. So I can say, oh, I made an attribute and I made it a string and I meant to make it a number. I can change. Oh, sorry, I can change the name. Maybe I meant to put an extra character in the name of the attribute. I can change that, but anywhere I've used action code, where I have literally typed the name of the now old and wrong name, I'll need to go through and change that. And you're thinking, oh, well, that's impossible to fix. It's not really, because you probably did it in an edict, a stamp. I mean, the places you're going to look are an edict, a stamp, a rule, and a query. And you can just run an agent to look for that, the old wrong spelling in those places. And, despite the silent eye rolling that inevitably happens at that point, it's actually very quick to do. And so you can change. So when as inevitably happens when you're doing a bit of incremental formalization, so that thing I made last week is really cool, but actually what I meant to have done and what I meant to do was I meant to have this sort of extra bit in it. Sometimes you may need to flush that through yourself.
So one of the things I do is typically every once in a while I'll open up an attribute browser window. And then I'll ensure that I'm looking at action, query, edict, attributes of all my nodes, and immediately something will then pop up in just the broad view. If there's a spelling change or a prototype change that I can recognize, it's a fast way to go about it.
So here I can show, because hopefully it's showing on screen, is we talked about the fact that if you're bequeathing things, so we have if I give a new note the prototype P grant, it will create these folders for me. But if you note that, for instance, the deadline folder is not a prototype itself, but it does have a prototype. It's using the prototype folder, which is here. And this is exactly what you want to do to ensure that these new things are created using this prototype. If you just made those prototypes, you may not get the outcome you expect. Another interesting thing to note here is that this classic thing of trying to demo on the fly is these didn't mean to have content in them. These got copied, and the reason they got copied is that when Michael went to copy them, this folder was closed. So if you just want to copy that, just select that note. If you select that with this closed, you'll probably end up copying everything in it, which wasn't your intent. But obviously, you'll note that now I've removed these from the prototypes, there is no longer a little disclosure triangle. So if I now make a grant 5, sorry, I'm an equally dyspraxic typist, that now you'll notice that those same 4 folders came in, but none of them has any child notes. So in fact, for instance, this is a case where, because we know it happened, we'd actually go back and say, right, that's not pertinent there, because that actually was that's a mistake. And this is something that I find actually comes quite naturally. Well, once you get round, in a sense, once you get round thinking that the computer's going to do everything for you, you develop the knack of saying, okay, even if you just write it down on a bit of paper or something, or a digital note, someone said, right, I need to circle back and I need to just double check those things. It's never broken. Tinderbox has a fairly good, essentially, backup system, so it's always saving into things. If you have Time Machine on, it's there, but essentially there's even a sort of a short range backup that's hidden somewhere behind the curtain on your OS. So for instance, if you did prod in the right place and it dies spectacularly, probably you'll be unlucky if you lose more than 30 seconds of work. So don't worry on that score.
Sorry to cut in. You can also just save your Tinderbox projects to your iCloud, which is also a good saving mechanism, because there's nothing really to do that.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I know. And again, we all have very different work styles. One of the things to bear in mind is Tinderbox was basically started out as a desktop tool. It sort of predates the notion of sync everything everywhere all at the time. So even if your collaborator is just you on a different Mac, so maybe you're working on a different physical Mac at home and saying, your university office or your business office or whatever, the trick really is to make sure you close it. So when we tend to leave everything open these days because computers are comparatively so reliable. A good tip though, if you're doing this thing where you're sort of shifting locations, is get in the habit of just closing the file down.
The day I actually stopped using more than one computer for my Tinderbox files is the day 90% of my troubles disappeared.
Another useful thing, it relates to something coming down the pipe, something you won't see because it's internal in the sort of saved document, is that each Tinderbox document has a UUID, basically a universal global ID. That just means that Tinderbox has the way to know that this TBX file is not that TBX file. Good tip is to, if you are going to make a new copy of a file, don't go into Finder and duplicate it, which is something that probably many of us are used to doing. There's nothing wrong with it, but what will happen is both the new and the old file will have the same global indicator. And why does that matter? Well, coming soon, the thing that's been requested is to be able to basically make Tinderbox notes directly to other files. And to do that, Tinderbox needs to know which Tinderbox it's writing to. And migrate-notes.tbx is not good enough as a unique reference. So it will be using that UUID. So a thing to get used to is that if you do clone out files, and you can do that, and the best way to do it is if you press the Option key, duplicate becomes save as, and you can still give it the name you would have given it after you've duplicated it, but the key thing is Tinderbox will now say, right, this is a different file, even though it's exactly the same content bar the file name at that point, but the stored unique indicator, which most of us will never need to know or see, will be unique. Bruce, you have a question?
I'm just acting as housekeeper. Andreas about 20 minutes ago asked if you could do a quick demo on Poster. I don't know if there's enough time left.
Yes, yes. I can very quickly do that. Let me just think. I pull up. The difficulty with posters is, it's one of these things. They work best when you actually have a need for them. By which I mean that. So trying to think what I want to make a poster of is rather difficult, because what makes sense to any of us is, and I am trying to remember where.
You might pull up Eastgate's demo from last week. Actually, it has all the stuff, including an array, list array, and everything.
Okay. I know the other thing is everyone's saying, "Oh, is there a good demo?" Mark did do a demo file which was used on the backstage for some of the testing, but to take it to the stage where it's something to put in front of everybody that doesn't, and then it doesn't just create a list of new questions, means that it takes some time. And as you may imagine, actually getting the new version out of the door without problems and sort of dealing with things means that it will be along, just not this moment. As we're looking at, that was, where are we? No, that's today. Where's last week? Where are the meetups? section they can put in? Right, let's, oops, sorry, let's go to the.
I don't know that he shared the project file though, because I think I looked for it.
Okay.
I thought you might have it. Sorry, my bad.
Wait a minute. I think with luck, no, he's linked through my article. The key thing is that, and posters are in a sense really simple. The idea is where it came about was people wanted to, who are using MapView, want to be able to show something more than just a static picture or some text or something. So what you can do to any note is you can say, I want this note to be a poster, and you can do one of two things. The most powerful way is you say, right, I'm going to give you a template that's written in this using exactly the same methods as an export template, although you're not actually exporting anything, but you don't have to learn a new sort of code, as it were, all over again. And you effectively generate an HTML page. Under the hood, it's effectively an HTML page. And so you can call in whatever you like. If you want to do mathjacks and you want to do mathematical formulae, you can do chemical equations, you can use things like Plotly to make normal charts or maps, or you can, if you're that adventurous, you can go out to something like D3 and make just about anything under the sun, if you know how D3 works. But all that's happening is the note, which is still a note and has text that you can write in, on the map will appear as a box that will hold your graph in it. A thing to be explored, because this is fairly new, is that the degree to which you can say, right, I'm now going to bring my sort of departmental dashboard in that has about 14 different dynamic graphs in it. At some point, common sense says you don't want to have everything trying to update all the time. One way you can, if you also, I should add, if you just effectively, rather than building a page, you just want to see something like I say, a departmental report. There is a sort of secondary method of defining a poster where you just say, right, go get the thing at this address, and it will display that. Though I would add, I don't think by design it's intending to be used as a dashboard within a dashboard sort of sense. So it's a matter of expectation management and also exploration. I wouldn't, if you're exploring posters, I wouldn't take the most complicated thing that you can imagine possible.
No, well,
do that as
thank you very much, Mark. Is rather similar to what Mark Bernstein, I think, explained last week. The thing really is that exactly I don't know how to start.
Right.
So, but I realize if you say that it's best done when you have a pressing need and nobody has a pressing need at the moment, then
well, no, here we go. No, it's not. It's a sort of sense of. No, that's interesting. I don't know why those aren't rendering properly. Probably need to. There we go. So what you're seeing here, each of these is a poster. It's a bit odd here. These are separate notes because they're notes in this document. So this note, let's get this out of the way. Let's put that back on there. This note was written to tell you what's happening in here. So this is the poster. The thing that I have selected at the moment is the poster. The poster has a template. In this case, one I can tell from the name, this is going to be using MathJax, which is a JavaScript library for rendering mathematical formulae. And effectively, the poster does the HTML page, and then it's saying it asks the note, give me the code that is basically the formula. So
could you just quickly click on the mermaid thing, because mermaid is sort of I know it was just one below what
this one. Yeah.
That just seems to be sort of more understandable than MathJax to me.
Sure. Okay. Understood. Let me just open up. Just get that so we can come back to that in a second, because you can see how the sausage is made more easily that way. So we'll go to, so here we are. Here is the this is the mermaid poster. And it's using this template. So essentially it's making this HTML page. The bits that are being colored in orange are just a little nicety to show you that effectively this is where it's going to say, go get me stuff. So for instance, it's just doing a bit of setup there. But the main thing is here, it's saying, so that this is the meat of the HTML page.
Right.
And inside it's making a div HTML element called mermaid, because that's what the mermaid library wants. And it's saying, right, in there, go and use the value of the text of the note that I'm rendering.
Okay.
Which is this. So that's where you write your mermaid code.
Okay.
And magically your poster has this.
Right. So that helps a lot. Thank you very much. I've done a few screenshots, and when the video is up, I can grab perhaps the rest. But that gives me a starting point to experiment around a little bit. Thank you very much.
No, that's fine. And as I say, I mean, I'm sure, you know, I would love it to be out now, but it'll take a while. And I suspect a version of this sort of written up, you know, to be read cold by somebody else is something. So, you know, I was mentioning, so here's chemical formula done in the for any chemists in the room. Those you can use Smiles. These ones are using Plotly. So, you know, what it gets around is, yes, if you'd like to have a graph, you've done all your clever data, and indeed some of these are set up because the plot that you see is actually using a number of notes to provide the data. So for instance, you might be looking at a container of notes, each note of which is essentially, say, one of the rows of data, if you think in spreadsheet terms, that's generating the plot.
That's fine. I think that'll give me a something to try my luck with. And okay, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I know, I do understand. What we sort of need is you know, in a sense, is, you know, my first poster tutorial, and I'm sure that's somewhere in the pipeline.
Oh, didn't we start the session with "Hello World"? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm also conscious. Well, Whitney, to your comment, said, well, you know, rather use MathJax, can we use Mermaid? And the difficult thing is finding an example that actually is wide enough that you don't lose half the audience. And that's no disrespect to the people who are lost. It's just often quite difficult because either the example is so generic that everyone said, well, it's obvious, and then when they try it themselves on the thing that they're interested in, it doesn't make sense. Or you have something that's, you know, just abstract enough from what you do to actually also make no sense. But I think that's there for us all. Art.
Yeah. So just sort of a two-part and almost a wrap-up question and comment. So with regards to posters, you also have the beauty of being able to feed not only attribute values that might be generated on the fly or might change according to your project status and so on. And you can feed that into the poster and then obviously be given the dashboard effect like of an update. But then also using fetch, now you're in a position to go out and poll the internet for updated data on, say, weather patterns or tides, and throw that into a poster as well.
Yep.
Okay.
And I mentioned this thing. So you can use, instead of basically using a poster template, in this case, we're using so-called poster URL. And this poster is effectively pulling this page live from the web, but it's also using you know, just to make the point, is using a little bit of custom CSS. So for instance, you can see that the yellow bar has disappeared here, and so well, it's actually a slightly different page, but effectively this bit on the yellow is that bit there, action code. So which is, it's not a matter of best. I don't think of it in those terms. It's a matter of, well, which do I need to do? If there's something you sort of need to see where it's basically done for you, that's fine. Also, the thing above here is showing you can have a degree of sort of dynamic stuff going on. But as my sense is, I haven't really pushed hard on this, but there will be a point where if you just decide to put some really, really complicated thing in there, you have to bear in mind that you're pulling something, you know, the calculation has to happen somewhere.
Right.
So you may just find that it perhaps doesn't update as fast as you like or you expect it, but it doesn't mean it's malfunctioning. It just means that actually you need to just wait a little time for the computer to catch up. Is there anything else on posters?
No, I was going to actually ask you one question on what you mentioned before when you alluded to what's coming, and that's sort of related to posters. So basically what you're saying now is we are potentially opening that creaky door to universal libraries or collaborative Tinderbox projects.
I don't know. The most immediate request. I mean, and it's been mentioned in the. I'm not giving anything away because it was mentioned to an answer to a question in the forum.
Yeah.
What actually happened is it brought in quite late in the 9.6 release, and I think the general suggestion is not to try and fix it before 9.6. So 9.6 is out the door. We can use the new posters, we can play with the new hyperbolic view and all that.
Yeah.
Because again, I can immediately see there are going to be 2 or 3 different groups using inter-document links in quite different manners. And you begin to think of all sorts of things like, well, how do you tell which link is a web link different to a Tinderbox link? Well, well, who's to say? And for instance, and how would you know which are which? So maybe we're going to need to have another system attribute or something that tells you how many Tinderbox links you have, in order that you can actually meaningfully use the thing that you can conceptualize doing at the moment. And that's the bedding down that needs to happen, and that's more easily done when we're not trying to put a whole host of features to bed. It's been trialed. There is there will be a 9.6.1, I think, fairly imminently, that's fixing a couple of effectively bug type issues, performance issues, or 1 or 2 things that were uncovered in once 9.6 went out the door, and that's inevitable with that many changes and tweaks.
Right.
But so that the links are a known thing, they will come. And I think probably it's also useful to but send them directly actually to Eastgate. But if you have particular requirements for them, it's probably worth stating. I mean, the worst is the answer will be, well, no, or not yet, or yes. I mean, the useful part being that it may be that the very act of writing it now may just show that yes, another property or another attribute or something is needed to just enable the feature to work in the style that you want. I think, funnily enough, if I go, it's probably because I think I forgot to take it out. That actually, funny enough, sorry, if I go to the syntax library, so I mentioned the UUID. If you were to open up the XML of a Tinderbox document, sorry, this is in a picture. If I go to here, so there's that. And in fact, the links are beginning to, so the links are beginning to store the destination document or probably the source document. And this is why you want to make sure going forward that you don't have 2 differently named documents that unwittingly have the same UUID because of the way you created them.
But if I go through my existing corpus of Tinderbox projects and I notice that I did that, can I manually change the UUID through XML edit?
You probably don't want to, because the UUID is made by a process that basically does magic I don't understand to ensure that you don't get 2 the same.
Like a hash.
So just change. What I would suggest you do is the kind of thing you can do is you'll have some tool you might want, or use something like what is it, Fox Search or something. There are various tools you can do that can probably read the XML, basically read the source of all your Tinderbox documents, or all the ones you really care about, and just extract the UUIDs. You can review those, and if you see any that are the same, what you can probably do is find all the ones that have the same UUID that should be different, and save each of those as a copy. Now, at that point, you've got an exact replicant. The only thing basically that's changed is UUID. Then you can throw away or archive the old one, and you now have the document that is basically sort of unique in terms of UUID.
With the same name, etc. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. anything else at this point? No, I just scroll back and see. Oh no, I don't know. I'm slightly worried about the poster thing I showed you is Mark Bernstein's document, and he has some plans for it. So I might just not post that in case I muddy the waters. As I say, something is coming. And I think the best thing is to, I know it's exciting to want to play with it now, but I wait, there will be fairly shortly. Likely, I suspect there may be a sort of PDF and a Tinderbox to go with it, which will likely include all or some of the content that's there. That was something that was lashed together for the backstage crew just to be able to work with. So at the risk of being saying no, I may decline on that score. I'm just checking were there anything external things. I know I've made a couple of tidying up points to Michael Singh there, which is no disrespect to him. I know how infernally difficult it is trying to do stuff on the run. One observation I did have, and this is something I think is a point that Bruce has brought up occasionally, is, I mean, we cantered really fast through this. Don't worry. I mean, he was going down into the depths of things like setting tasks and things. All of these incremental. Don't feel you've got to do this out of the trap. You can put this in later. Now, once any individual person has sort of got to the stage where they understand that, then it's a very easy pattern to reapply. When you do it the first time, there are an awful lot of moving parts, and it can be overwhelming. So I would sort of say, start small. Tinderbox is terribly forgiving of you going back and putting this in later. A good thing to do is if you see yourself wanting to do this sort of granularity, I would almost say have a sort of clean working document and a dirty working document. And the point of the dirty working document, this is where you make all your mistakes. And they say, oh, right, this is how this feature works. Right, this is the code I want. And you put the clean one into the document. The other thing is, and into your dirty working document, as it were, put the sort of necessary and sufficient real world information that you have, because it's really useful. It helps you find false positives and negatives, something that should match that doesn't, and it allows you to figure out why, and just to explore, because sometimes just creating a lot of prototypes without any real world notes in them means you have to circle back later and put extra little tweaks in. But there's no error. The temptation is to want to get ahead. But it's really useful to hold on to the fact that there is a degree of complexity and there's a degree of learning involved, and you've got to do it once. And the first time you do it, it's often wildly counterintuitive, simply because you don't know where to look for things. Obviously, there's lots of information in ATB-Ref, and if you get stuck, do hit up the forums. And especially if you're able to share a small tinderbox saying, I'm trying to do this, and here's a file. I thought what I would get is this outcome. In fact, I get something else. And like it's not, someone will be able to pretty instantly point you in the right direction. Okay.
No, thank you for that very much.
Does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, I suppose I should. We're actually we're over time. Kill surprise. I shall gently usher everyone from the room, because I need to leave the recording running, and Michael will tidy up later. I'll share the document back with him so he knows the small number of edits I made. But this is useful, and don't worry that we didn't build out every feature, because the great things about this is they give a really useful little reference point to come back to and circle around on. So I don't know if you're still there, Kenneth. If you well, anyway, we'll close out now, and I'm about to log off, and Michael will top and tail the recording. So, well, goodbye to all. the chat.